My name's Kevin Donaghy. I'm with Foam Pack. We're sales and service on dual component machinery and single component machinery. I'm here in Carlisle today to do a startup on a Predator. This is our Predator machine, and for the initial startup, the first thing we want to do is we want to check that our drums are vented. And of course in our A, we've got a desiccant cartridge. We want to make sure that that's vented and that the B drum is vented. And we want to make sure that our air lines going to our transfer pumps are on, the valves are on, and that the hoses are plugged in on both the A and the B. And we also want to check to make sure that our incoming material valves are open on both of our A and our B. And they should be. We just want to check to make sure that they are. We're going to start our generator and our air compressor. And we've already started them. So we're going to come over to the machine itself, and the first thing we want to do is our main power switch here should just stay on, but we just want to check to make sure that it is on. And we want to take our hose heat dial. This is our hose heat dial here. We want to make sure that we're all the way at 0 before we turn these breakers on. And we're going to turn both breakers on. The hose heat and the primary heater breaker, both of them on. And we're going to turn our hose heat dial up to 100%, all the way up. Now we want to check that our amp gauge has a reading on it. Now in this case, we've got 100 foot of hose, so we should have about 7 amps showing on this amp gauge. And that's just to tell us that our hose heat is actually working. And now we're going to actually stick a thermometer into our hose so that we can monitor that hose heat and know when we've gotten up to temperature. We stuck our thermometer in our hose to monitor our hose heat, and we waited for our hose to get up to temperature. We're running 2 different temperatures depending on the application. For extrusion, we're looking for 100 degrees, and for a full spray, 130 degrees. Now that thermometer is going to read approximately 20 degrees lower than the material actually is in the hose. We're only up against the hose with that thermometer. We're not actually inside it. So just keep in mind 20 degrees lower reading on that thermometer than the actual temperature that we're looking for. Extrusion 100 degrees, full spray 130. Now we've waited for our hose to get up to temperature. Once we've reached our temperature, in this case we're going to do a full spray. So we're waiting for a reading of 110 degrees on that thermometer, and that's going to indicate that our material is actually 130. Then we're going to come over to our controller, and we're going to turn our hose heat dial down just enough to maintain the temperature of that hose. And that's going to be determined by the outside temperature. In this particular case here, we're about 70 degrees out here, so approximately 40% is going to maintain that hose heat for us. Now, of course, if the temperature is colder, we're going to raise that percentage up slightly. If it's hotter, we can back it down. And all we're doing is trying to maintain that hose heat with the control dial. It's not automatic. We have to manually control that hose heat. Now that our hose is up to temperature, we're going to bring the machine up to pressure. And to do that, we're going to do that by raising the pressure on our air regulator here. Now there's a lock on this regulator. When this knob is pushed in, the regulator's locked and we can't adjust it. So you don't want to try to force that. We're just going to break the regulator. If it doesn't turn, more than likely it's locked. So we just want to pull that knob out. We're doing 2 different pressures here. A higher pressure for a full spray, 80 pounds of air pressure for a full spray, and a slightly lower pressure for an extrusion, about 60 pounds of air pressure. In this case, we're doing a full spray, so we're going to go up to 80 pounds of air pressure. So we're just going to turn our regulator up until we have 80 pounds of air pressure. And the machine's going to cycle a couple of times. And we don't have to be right on the money at 80, but fairly close. So now we've got 80 pounds of air pressure. And in this case, just from heating our material, we've actually come up to pressure, but normally the machine would make a couple of cycles. Now that we've brought the machine up to pressure, we want to make sure that our A and B gauges are within 500 pounds of each other. And we are. So now we're going to go out to the gun and start the gun up. Now that we've brought our machine up to pressure and we've checked that our gauges are within 500 pounds of each other, it's time now to, if we're doing a full spray, we have to don our personal protective equipment, which will include covering any exposed skin, of course covering your head, goggles, and respirator. On the respirator, we need a NOS cartridge with an organic pre-filter. That's typically going to be a purple and black cartridge on there. And of course gloves. Now that we've brought the machine up to pressure, don the PPEs, now we're ready to come out to the gun. The first thing we're going to do is plug the air into the gun. We want to make sure once we plug the air into the gun that there's plenty of air coming out the front of the gun. What's keeping this gun clean is that air flowing through the mixing chamber. Now we want to check that the action of the gun is good, that the gun is actually triggering back and forth. So we're going to take the safety off. Just going to push in, turn to the left, and it'll pop out, and the safety's off. And we're going to trigger the gun a couple times while we're watching the front end of the gun. Make sure that the action is good. You can see when we trigger the gun, the air stops when the gun's triggered. So we're satisfied that the gun is triggering and not acting sluggish or getting hung up. Very important to make sure we put the safety on at this point. Now we're going to check to see if the gun's leaking internally. So as we're watching this stream of air coming out of the gun, we're going to open the manual valves. Now when you do this, make sure that the gun's not pointing toward you. If we've got a bad O-ring, material is going to leak right from that joint. We're just going to open our valves while we're looking for mist in this stream of air. And we would see it immediately. We have no mist there, so we know that that side's not leaking. Now we're going to go to the other side. We'll just leave that open. We know that side's not leaking, so we don't have to shut it. Now let me just move over a bit in case that O-ring's no good. All right, now if the gun was leaking, we'd immediately see a steady stream of mist in that. So now we know the gun's not leaking internally, and now we're ready to do a 3-second test spray. Make sure we put the safety on whenever we release that trigger. Now we want to check that test spray for color and rise. And we also want to check our gauges to make sure that we're within 500 pounds of each other. Normal running conditions, the B pressure is going to be about 100, 200 pounds higher than the A. That's normal running conditions.